Killing a cop is one of the deadliest sins in America. But when the killer is a cop, and not just any cop but Antoinette Frank, a young officer who gunned down her own partner and 2 civilians, the betrayal is unforgivable. The badge became her mask for murder. So what happens when the protector becomes the predator? What does the state do when one of its own turns deadly? This is the case of Antoinette Frank, a death row inmate for more than 30 years. Welcome to True Crime Matter, where every story we tell is grounded in facts, drenched in truth, and harder to forget than you think. Subscribe, tap the bell, and stay locked in. Because this case, it's more than murder. It's betrayal in uniform. New Orleans, Louisiana, early 1993. The city was desperate. Homicide rates were soaring. Trust in law enforcement was at rock bottom. Officers were walking away from the badge faster than the department could hire them. The New Orleans Police Department, once considered one of the most corrupt in the country, was crumbling from the inside. Murders, drug scandals, resignations, public outrage. They needed new blood, fast. So when 23-year-old Antoinette Renee Frank applied to join the force, she looked on paper like hope. Young, African-American, a local face from Lafourche Parish, born April 30, 1971. Educated, ambitious. She wasn't just a potential officer, she was a symbol. In a majority black city racked by racial tension, the NOPD believed officers like Frank could help build trust where it was long broken. But the cracks were there from day one. Frank's application was riddled with false information. She lied on several sections, including about her education and personal history. Then came the psychological evaluations, standard procedure for all NOPD recruits. She failed both. Twice. Dr. Philip Scuria, a psychiatrist contracted by the department, issued a clear warning. Do not hire her. His report stated that Frank lacked emotional stability, decisiveness, and had a worrying absence of confidence under pressure. She wasn't just a risk. She was the kind of person you don't put in uniform. Period. But the NOPD was running out of options. Officers in New Orleans at the time earned significantly less than cops in cities like Houston or Atlanta. Morale was at an all-time low. On top of that, an outdated rule required that all officers live within city limits, drastically shrinking the pool of qualified applicants. That rule wouldn't be lifted until 2014, too late for the damage already done. So the department did what many broken systems do. They looked the other way. Frank was quietly given a second chance to apply. This time her application sailed through. On February 7, 1993, she was officially hired. 3 weeks later, on February 28, she graduated from the academy, near the top of her class. From the outside, she looked like a star recruit. But the truth? She was already unraveling. Her fellow officers described her as awkward, emotionally detached, and distant. She avoided social interactions. She froze under pressure. Some said she looked like she didn't belong in the uniform at all. In fact, by August 1993, just 6 months into the job, her supervisors were ready to send her back to the academy for retraining. One officer put it bluntly. She didn't know how to be a cop. She was placed under frequent supervisory review. Whispers grew louder. Was she unstable? Unfit? A liability? But while many inside the department had doubts, outside she was being celebrated. Frank received Officer of the Month awards from the local Kiwanis Club. She smiled for photos, shook hands at community events. Her commendations painted her as a model cop, a face of change, a story the department could point to. But those awards, they weren't about performance. They were about PR. The truth was, Antoinette Frank was already living 2 lives. One was the uniform, the badge, and the polished smile. The other, darker, hidden, was a growing obsession with control, violence, and chaos. No one in the department knew it yet, but in less than 2 years she would walk into a quiet restaurant in New Orleans East, pull out her service weapon, and murder 3 innocent people, including one of their own. And the signs? They had always been there. By early 1994, Officer Antoinette Frank had barely made it through her first year on the force. She was 23, assigned to routine patrols across the New Orleans East District, far from the tourist lights of the French Quarter. Her file was already cluttered with disciplinary notes, failed evaluations, and repeated concerns about her behavior in the field. She was quiet, withdrawn. But no one expected what came next. One night in late 1994, Frank responded to a 911 call near the Desire Housing Projects, a notoriously dangerous neighborhood off Alvar Street. A young man named Rogers Lacaze had been shot. He was just 18 years old, a smooth-talking street dealer with a sharp grin and a growing reputation in New Orleans' drug trade. Frank kneeled beside him in the street. He wasn't dying, just bleeding. And he was charming. Some say seductive. It should have been a routine call. But something snapped in Frank that night. Some officers believed she saw him as a victim she could save. Others, they think she saw something darker. A partner. A mirror. Someone who didn't care about rules either. Their connection grew fast, and dangerously quiet. Within weeks, Lacaze was riding in Frank's personal vehicle. Then he was spotted in her NOPD squad car, even at active crime scenes. Frank told curious officers he was her nephew. Sometimes she said trainee. But the truth was simpler. They were lovers. The relationship was strictly forbidden. Frank didn't care. Despite knowing that Lacaze was a known felon, despite clear violations of NOPD policy, she kept him close. She introduced him to fellow officers. Let him wear parts of her uniform. Handed him a badge. She even let him sit in on police interrogations. By early 1995, rumors were everywhere. And Frank wasn't hiding anymore. Witnesses claimed the pair had begun committing robberies together, using her authority to pull over cars, then shake down drivers for money. One report suggested she flashed her badge while Lacaze brandished a weapon, an illegal TD9 pistol. But the most disturbing incident came just weeks before the massacre. In February 1995, Frank and Lacaze were seen leaving a party together on the West Bank. On the drive home, they allegedly pulled over two young men. A confrontation erupted. Lacaze pulled the TC9 and pointed it at them. A civil sheriff driving by stopped, stunned to see a cop standing calmly beside an armed man. Frank didn't disarm Lacaze. She didn't arrest him. She vouched for him. "He's the good guy," she told the deputy. "It's under control." No charges were filed. No report made. The story vanished. Inside the NOPD, some tried to sound the alarm. Again. Frank's behavior was erratic. Her connection to a violent suspect wasn't just inappropriate. It was dangerous. But it didn't matter. New Orleans was still short-staffed. Officers were stretched thin. And complaints about Frank never seemed to stick. So she stayed on the street. Gun on her hip. Lacaze in her car. And a storm brewing just beneath the surface. Because by March 1995, the two were plotting something bigger. They knew the Kim on Vietnamese restaurant well, on Bullard Avenue in New Orleans East. Frank worked off-duty security there. The Vu family paid her in cash. They trusted her. They even gave her a key. And she had just one question on her mind. How much money was in that building? It was a quiet Friday night in New Orleans East, the kind of night where the air hangs heavy with humidity and silence. Located at 3800 block of Bullard Avenue, just off Interstate 10, the Kim on Vietnamese restaurant had closed for the evening. The Vu family, hardworking immigrants from Vietnam, were tidying up as they did every night. Ha Vu, 24, and her younger brother, Quang Vu, just 17, were mopping floors, wiping tables, and preparing to lock up. In the kitchen, their older sister Chow Vu, 23, tucked the day's cash into a microwave, a routine hiding spot no one outside the family was supposed to know. But someone did. That someone had a key. Antoinette Frank, now 24 years old and still an active duty officer with the New Orleans Police Department, had worked off-duty security at Kim On for months. The Vus had trusted her, called her part of the family. They even paid her in cash for private patrol shifts to keep the restaurant safe in the crime-ridden neighborhood. They never imagined she'd use her badge to rob them. Or worse. Earlier that night, Frank had already come by, twice, with Roger's laquais now 18 in tow. They claimed they were hungry, grabbed leftover food, joked around, but something in Frank's demeanor felt off. Chow Vu noticed it. She told her siblings she had a bad feeling. Something was wrong. Then just after 1:30 a.m. Frank came back a third time. This time she came alone. Except she wasn't. Laquais followed close behind, armed with a 9mm handgun, later identified as a Taurus PT-92. Frank used her stolen key to unlock the back door and let them both inside. Officer Ronald A. Williams II, 25, was on duty that night too, working the same private security detail Frank once held. A proud NOPD patrolman, Williams was well-liked, respected, and, most critically, not in on the plan. He didn't know he was about to be ambushed by one of his own. As Williams moved through the dining area, he caught sight of Laquais stepping from the shadows. The first bullet struck him in the neck. He collapsed instantly, paralyzed. The second shot hit him in the back. The third right in the head. Execution style. The shooter? Roger's Laquais. The accomplice? Antoinette Frank. And the motive? Money. Control. Chaos. In the chaos, Frank stormed into the kitchen. He found Ha Vu, Quang Vu, and a terrified kitchen worker. She forced them into the walk-in cooler. Then she turned to Quang and demanded the money. He didn't know where it was. She pistol-whipped him. Screamed. Threatened. Still no answer. Eventually she opened the microwave and found over $10,000 in cash, tips, savings, and payroll. And then, she raised her gun and shot Ha Vu 3 times. Then she turned and fired 6 bullets into Quang Vu, killing him on the spot. The third worker, terrified and silent, managed to hide in the shadows. So did Chow Vu, crouched and trembling in the cooler, heart racing. She knew the killer. She knew her name. She'd eaten dinner with her. Now she was watching her murder her siblings. And then just as fast as they came, Frank and Laquais left. Disappeared into the darkness. But the nightmare wasn't over. March 4, 1995. Roughly 2:10 a.m. in New Orleans East. The streets were quiet. But inside the Kim Anh Vietnamese restaurant on Bullard Avenue, the silence was drenched in blood. 3 people were dead. Officer Ronald A. Williams II, 25, shot 3 times in the dining area. His body still in uniform, badge on his chest, service weapon untouched in its holster. Ha Vu, 24, executed with 3 close-range bullets after begging for her life. Quang Vu, just 17 years old, gunned down with 6 shots to the chest and torso. But 2 witnesses had survived. Chow Vu, 23, and a frightened restaurant employee whose name was later withheld for protection. They had hidden inside the walk-in freezer, crouched in darkness, listening to their siblings being murdered just feet away. They waited. Minutes passed like hours. Eventually, Chow crawled from the cooler and slipped out the back, barefoot and shaking. She bolted across the neighboring lot and banged on a nearby door, screaming for help. At 2:15 a.m., a 911 call was placed from a residence adjacent to Kim Anh. The report was shocking. Officer down. Triple homicide. Suspect fled. But no one, not even the dispatcher, could have predicted what would happen next. Just minutes later, Antoinette Frank returned to the crime scene. She wasn't in plain clothes. She wasn't hiding. She came back wearing her full New Orleans Police Department uniform, badge shining, pistol holstered. She had borrowed a marked squad car from another officer and pulled up like she was just another first responder on the scene. Frank walked straight through the back entrance of the restaurant, the same door she had used to enter during the robbery. Her gun was still with her. Her face calm. She was there to kill again. To finish what she and Laquais had started. 2 witnesses were still alive. She needed them gone. But fate had other plans. Just as Frank entered the building, Chow Vu, still panicked and shaking, spotted her from the front of the restaurant. Her scream pierced the silence. She did it. That's her. She shot my brother and sister. Chow didn't hesitate. She ran into the arms of a real NOPD officer, pointing directly at Frank in uniform. Frank froze. He tried to play it cool. Claimed she didn't know what was happening. Said she had just arrived. She even began investigating the scene, pretending to check for survivors. But Chow wouldn't back down. She kept shouting her name, over and over. "That's Antoinette. She's the one who killed them." Real officers at the scene were stunned. They knew Frank. He was one of them. But within seconds their confusion gave way to cold, sick realization. A fellow cop had murdered another officer and civilians, and was now impersonating a responder to cover her tracks. She was immediately detained. Her gun was taken. Her uniform searched. Her story fell apart. By 3 a.m. Antoinette Frank was in custody. Later that morning, detectives picked up Rogers Lacaze at a friend's apartment. He was wearing Officer Williams' department-issued wristwatch and had used the slain officer's Chevron gas card just an hour earlier. The evidence was stacking up fast. But no one knew, not yet, that the darkest part of Frank's story hadn't even been discovered. Because less than a year later, a neighbor's dog would start digging under her house. And what it found would change everything. When Antoinette Renee Frank, a sworn officer with the New Orleans Police Department, was arrested on March 4, 1995 for the brutal murder of 3 people, it sent shockwaves across Louisiana. A police officer, one of their own, not only implicated in a robbery and triple homicide, but also accused of executing a fellow officer in uniform? This wasn't just a crime. It was a crisis of faith. The people of New Orleans, already weary from police scandals and department corruption, couldn't believe it. The headlines didn't make sense. NOPD officer accused in massacre. Teen drug dealer and policewoman charged with triple murder. Citizens watched in disbelief as local news aired mugshots of 24-year-old Officer Antoinette Frank and her boyfriend 18-year-old Rogers Lacaze, a known street dealer with a violent past. And inside the NOPD? Silence. Embarrassment. Rage. Frank had slipped through their hiring system after lying on her application, failing psychological exams and earning whispered complaints from fellow officers. Now she was in shackles facing 3 counts of first-degree murder. The question on everyone's mind: would Louisiana finally hold one of its own accountable? Both Frank and Lacaze were indicted by an Orleans Parish grand jury in the months following their arrest. The evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage and 911 timelines placed them at the scene. A .38 caliber Taurus PT-92, recovered from Lacaze, matched the bullets in Officer Williams' body. Frank's fingerprints were found inside the Kim Anh restaurant, on the microwave where the money had been hidden. And most damning of all, surviving witness Chow Vu had pointed directly at Frank, screaming to officers, "She killed my brother and sister. She shot the officer too." The city held its breath. In July 1995, Rogers Lacaze was tried first. He showed little remorse. His decision to use Officer Williams' Chevron gas card just minutes after the murders left no doubt about his involvement. Within days, the jury found him guilty on all charges and returned a death sentence. But it was Frank's trial in October that drew the biggest crowd. The courtroom was packed with reporters, retired officers, victims' families, and civilians who had once trusted her badge. Held in the Criminal District Court for Orleans Parish, Frank's trial began under tight security. District Attorney Harry Connick Sr., father of the famous musician, led the prosecution team with surgical precision. The state didn't need theatrics. They had evidence and witnesses. Chow Vu took the stand and recounted in harrowing detail how Frank forced her family into the kitchen, demanded money and executed her siblings. Forensic experts tied bullet casings to Frank's personal weapon. Her attempt to return to the crime scene as a responding officer was described as a bold effort to kill remaining witnesses and manipulate the investigation. And yet, despite the stakes, Frank's defense team fumbled. They had subpoenaed 39 witnesses, but called none. They didn't argue trauma. They didn't paint her as a manipulated woman. They barely fought. To observers it looked like surrender. When the jury finally rose to deliberate, you could hear the stillness in the courtroom. No one even touched their coffee. Reporters prepared for a long night. But it only took 22 minutes. A record for a capital murder verdict in the city of New Orleans. Frank stood emotionless as the jury foreman read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The next day, after only 45 more minutes, the jury recommended the death penalty. On October 20, 1995, Antoinette Frank was sentenced to die by lethal injection. She was immediately transferred to the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women in St. Gabriel, becoming the only woman on Louisiana's death row at the time. And as the steel doors slammed shut behind her, everyone assumed that was it. Justice had been served. The case was over. But it wasn't. Because months later, under the floorboards of a modest home in St. Roch, a neighbor's dog began to dig. And what it uncovered beneath Antoinette Frank's old house was another body, one no one had been looking for. In the St. Roch neighborhood just off Congress Drive, a neighbor of Frank's former residence noticed her dog scratching obsessively beneath the raised wooden frame of the vacant home. At first it was dismissed as normal behavior. Then the dog dragged something out. A human skull. Detectives with the NOPD Homicide Division were called in immediately. They secured the property and began a controlled excavation beneath the house. What they found buried in a shallow, unmarked grave chilled even seasoned investigators. A complete human skeleton, torn clothing consistent with casual men's wear, and one unmistakable detail. A gunshot wound to the back of the skull. Execution style. Within days, investigators matched the remains to a 1993 missing persons report, filed by Antoinette Frank herself. The man reported missing? Her own father, Adam Frank, a former U.S. Army veteran. According to the original report, Antoinette claimed Adam had left the house and never returned. There was no follow-up investigation. No media coverage. Just a form and a lie. Now his body had been found, buried beneath the floorboards of the same home Antoinette lived in when she first applied to the New Orleans Police Department. It didn't take long for investigators to draw their conclusions. Antoinette Frank didn't just kill her partner. She didn't just execute two innocent restaurant workers. She murdered her own father and lived on top of his grave. In later psychiatric evaluations conducted during her time on death row, Frank finally opened up about her childhood. She described Adam Frank as abusive, violent, and controlling. She claimed he had sexually assaulted her, physically beat her, and dominated every corner of her life. A psychologist who interviewed her wrote, "She buried her rage where no one could see it, until it exploded." Despite this, prosecutors never charged her for the murder of Adam Frank. When asked why, one investigator said, "She's already on death row. What more do you want? Another trial?" But others weren't so sure. To them this was the first kill. And everything that followed, the lies, the manipulation, the murders, was built on top of that one terrible secret. It's been 30 years since the bloodshed at Kim On restaurant shocked Louisiana. Today Antoinette Frank is 54 years old. She's still behind bars at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, still awaiting the state's final word. But in 2023, a political shift gave death row inmates across Louisiana new hope. Then Governor John Bel Edwards publicly opposed the death penalty, urging state officials to reconsider all active death row cases. In response, 56 of 57 inmates, including Frank, filed clemency petitions. They were all denied. But Frank wasn't done yet. In April 2025, her attorneys filed a motion to overturn her sentence, citing her history of childhood trauma, psychiatric instability, and ineffective legal defense during her original trial. And the court listened. On May 15, 2025, a judge approved a new sentencing hearing for Antoinette Frank. It's scheduled for December 2025. That hearing will decide everything. Whether she's granted clemency and her death sentence is lifted, or whether Louisiana finally carries out the execution that's been delayed for 3 decades. Either way, the clock is ticking. And the woman once trusted to serve and protect may finally face the justice she's outrun for far too long. If you think justice should be served, comment execution. If you believe trauma should offer redemption, comment clemency. And don't forget to subscribe to True Crime Matter for more real-life stories that dig deep beneath the surface, just like this one. Until next time, stay aware. Stay curious. And never forget, evil can wear a badge too.